Star Wars! The epic saga continues with Episode 7. Hopefully by now they will have learned their lesson and will keep Jar Jar Binks out of this, or any sort of Jar Jar Binks equivalent. Jar Jar Binks has a lot of blame thrown onto him. A lot of people say he is one of, if not the main reason, the prequel trilogies were not nearly as good as the originals. But what many people don't realize is that it's actually Jar Jar's fault that everything bad that happened in the prequel trilogies happened in the story. And also how the original trilogies happened. Meaning Jar Jar is essentially one of the most important characters in the entire Star Wars mythos. But wait, how does that even work? Hey, it's Loxton, and in this video I'm going to explain how Jar Jar Binks is responsible for all of the bad things that have happened in the prequel trilogy and the original trilogy, and then some. But wait, you say, there are already tons of videos and articles all about this, not to mention the Reddit post that started all of the advancing of this theory by Lumpawaru? However you say it. And yes, I will be the first to admit this is not my original idea, but I am greatly expanding upon it and presenting it in a way that I feel is excellent into helping more and more people understand this theory. And to show what I mean by expanding upon it, here is a screenshot of my script for this video. Everything highlighted in blue is from that original Reddit post. Everything else I'm adding in. But still, all the inspiration and everything that started this theory is entirely being credited to Lumpawaru on Reddit. Thanks a bunch. So what was this idea that Lumpawaru proposed? Well, it was that Jar Jar Binks was originally intended to be the big bad, revealed near the end or middle of the prequel trilogies. But that sounds silly. Like, really silly. I mean, look at him. But I would like you to suspend your disbelief for just a moment as I tell you the cold, hard, canonical fact that the wars in Star Wars are the fault of Jar Jar Binks. So after Jar Jar and Queen Amidala become friends, Jar Jar finds a keen interest in politics, eventually working his way up and becoming the associate planetary representative for Naboo in the Galactic Senate. This basically meant he would go with the Queen and be at her side during Galactic Senate meetings. But soon enough, multiple assassination attempts were made on Queen Amidala and she had to go into hiding, meaning she could not attend the Galactic Senate, and Jar Jar would temporarily be responsible for taking her place until she can return. But being that Jar Jar was still inexperienced for this position meant that he would be easily influenced by those around him, leading him to eventually give a speech that directly contradicted all that Queen Amidala would want.
Misha proposed that the Senate give immediately emergency powers to the Supreme Chancellor.
It is with great reluctance that I have agreed to this calling.
Reluctant, eh? I bet. So basically, if Jar Jar were more competent, he would not have been so easily influenced, would not have given this speech that apparently was so amazing it made everyone change their minds, abandon democracy, and thus gave Chancellor Palpatine ultimate political power. And with no Palpatine in power, the Clone Wars may not have happened. The Clone Army wouldn't have killed all the Jedi. The Empire wouldn't have taken over the galaxy. The Death Star wouldn't have been built. Alderaan would still exist. And all that jazz. So, as far as all that goes, it's basically canon. Fact. But where we enter the realm of theory is saying that Jar Jar didn't give Palpatine ultimate political power because he's an idiot, but rather because he's on Palpatine's side. He is on the dark side of the Force. And that is what Lumpawaru's post is all about. And it exploded all over the internet, videos and news articles galore. It documents many reasons why one could assume Jar Jar is the ultimate Sith Lord. And now I've added to this as well, because if you go back and watch the original trilogy with all this in mind, you start noticing even more things. So first, let's talk about Jar Jar's character. How could a clumsy, bumbling idiot be such an ultimately powerful Sith Lord? And as with all theories that are this big, all of the evidence I bring up first is going to sound a bit like I'm stretching things too far. It's a bit unbelievable. But the idea is, once all of the evidence is on the table, everything starts tying itself together into one coherent story. So please, hold out until the end.
Jar Jar is a key to all this. If we get Jar Jar working.
Jar Jar has a few defining features, and I mean more than just his Gungan traits. I mean Jar Jar specifically has some uniqueness to him. He is an idiot and a klutz, but is also unbelievably lucky. Let's talk about those first two first. The way Jar Jar moves is all very clumsy. He falls over a lot, and he steps in things all the time. He's always moving about, and it's all very humorous, I suppose. But what if I told you that this was all done by Jar Jar on purpose? Shaolin monks, martial arts, feudal systems of order, chi, all of these are what heavily inspired the Jedi and the Sith, the use of the Force, all of that. But typically, whenever you think of martial arts, you think of things like Kung Fu, Tai Chi, Judo, all of which have moves similar to what you're seeing here. But there is one other martial art used by Shaolin monks called Ziquan, which is also known as Drunken Fist Wushu. Notable uses of this fighting technique are in the Jackie Chan movie Drunken Master, and the fighting style of Qin from King of Fighters. But Drunken Fist Wushu doesn't necessarily mean you have to be drunk while using it. In fact, it's taught to be used when you aren't drunk. The point of it is to appear drunk and clumsy in order to throw your enemy off guard. Leave them unsuspecting of your skill. But really, there is order to everything that you are doing. The clumsiness and the drunkenness is all purposeful. And if you look at this Ziquan training video, right beside many of the things Jar Jar does, it's easy to see the similarities. Okay, yeah, but even if his clumsiness was all for show, what does that even prove? Nothing in and of itself, but now let's look at another aspect of his character. His insane luck. As we see throughout The Phantom Menace, Jar Jar is incredibly lucky all the time, especially while fighting an army of droids. This was actually another reason why many people didn't like Jar Jar. His luck was pure, unbelievable. It was a joke, and not a very good one at that. But now, what if that wasn't luck? Because after all, in the words of Obi-Wan,
in my experience, there's no such thing as luck.
And if an old wise Jedi with in-depth knowledge of the Force doesn't believe luck exists, then it is very, very likely that luck doesn't exist in the Star Wars universe. But then what would you call all this then? Perhaps a combination of Drunken Fist Wushu and the use of the Force, allowing him to be aware of his enemy's positions at all times, allowing him to have a blaster fire on impact to the ground and shoot directly at a droid's weak point. But now, what's crazy about that is that it would fit perfectly into Jar Jar's name origins. For those of you who don't know, George Lucas likes putting meaning into his characters' names. Sometimes to the point where their names are obvious.
Han Solo.
As just one example of this, Vader in Darth Vader is Dutch for father. Kinda spoiling the movie for anyone that knows Dutch. So what then about Jar Jar Binks? Well, Jar has a few different meanings, but I find these to be the most relevant ones. Jar, to have a harsh or unpleasant effect on someone or something, and to make someone feel uneasy, an unsettling shock, an unpleasant break or conflict in rhythm, flow, or transition. And I'm sure many of you can already figure out how that fits. And actually, the reason Jar is in there twice as Jar Jar might actually be because he creates an unsettling shock twice. Once, when he gives all the power to Palpatine and unsettles the balance of the entire galaxy, and again, when he reveals himself as a Sith Lord to the audience. Okay, hang on. I am getting a bit ahead of myself there. I haven't even told you the most convincing evidence yet, and we'll get to that soon enough. But next, let's look at what Binks means. I mean, what in the world is a Binks? Unless you look at Bink in Scottish. which means bench. Something tells me that's not right. But being that George Lucas, when writing the entire Star Wars saga, was heavily inspired by a plethora of books, as in sometimes he even borrows whole scenes and characters from them. Now let's look at the classic fantasy series Xanth by Piers Anthony, because the main protagonist of this series is named Bink. And when you hear about this resemblance, it's kind of uncanny. In Xanth, all humans are required to have magic, and anyone who does not possess magic is exiled to Mundania. In the first book, Bink gets banished because it seems that he does not have magic. However, through trial and error, he eventually finds out that he does. His magic works in a very unique way, previously unseen in the world. His magic protects him, keeps him from harm, but not directly like a shield or anything, but rather, his magic cleverly conceals itself by acting through what appears to be coincidence. Just for an example, let's say a giant is about to step on him. Thankfully, while running, a root may poke slightly out of the ground, causing him to fall, and not run into where the giant is stepping. Or let's say someone is trying to cast Fireball on Bink, but just before casting, a lantern will be moved slightly with the wind, and the light will reflect off of a mirror in the distance that also moved with the wind, and the light reflects right into the Fireball caster, causing him to miss. Things like that. Only a select few very clever characters were able to figure out that his uncanny luck was actually just his magic working in mysterious ways. One eventually saying that Bink's talent is the most wonderful and devious talent in Xanth. Now replace magic with the Force, and Bink with Binks. The resemblance is very strong, as I'm sure you can see. If that doesn't at least convince you that Jar Jar is using the Force in a new, mysterious way, then I don't know what will. Actually, I do, and that's what we're going to talk about next. In order for Jar Jar to be a Sith Master, he would have to use the Force in some way, no? So aside from his forced luck, where do we see him use it? First, let's talk about Force Jump. This is an ability frequently used by Jedi and Sith alike. They use the Force upon themselves to leap high and far into the air. Oftentimes it looks silly because of how little effort their bodies are putting into jumping, but I mean, that's what makes sense since they are using the Force to jump. And you actually see Jar Jar do such a jump as seen here. And note, this is after you see him centering himself in the style of Drunken Fist Wushu. Maybe Gungans are just really good jumpers, I hear you say. And, well, maybe, but then surely we would have seen other Gungans doing similar feats, especially in their final battle. Also, a jump like this would mean Jar Jar is the only non-Force user capable of such a jump. So really, it's even less of a stretch to say that he's just using Force Jump. And besides, this isn't the only time he does it. There is one other occurrence. During this scene, where the Jedi and Jar Jar are ambushing this group of droids. Now, watch closely, because this is tricky and happens off-camera. As Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan jump off of this bridge, Jar Jar grabs onto the side of it on the far right. The left side of Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan. Then shortly after, we see him landing on the other side of Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon. And we know that this isn't just a director issue. It's not a continuity error. The animators didn't mess up. This was all planned out, because if we look at this droid here, this droid is looking at Jar Jar's original position, ready to fire. He even shoots his gun at Jar Jar's original position, and then Jar Jar falls over here. And the droid is like, computational error. Wait, what?
Oh, hell no!
So the idea goes that Jar Jar jumped down like this, similar to Luke Skywalker in this scene, and then used Force Jump to land on the other side, as a means of distracting some of the droids. And as you can see, that droid is very distracted.
Oh, snap!
Something to think about here is that Jar Jar and the droids are all animated characters, meaning every teeny tiny little motion they do was deliberate, planned out ahead of time. They are not actors that could make a mistake or make some weird motion.
Take over.
Being animated means everything they do is planned. Okay, so force-powered luck and force jumping. So he can use the Force, but that doesn't necessarily mean he's full of malintent, right? I mean, he did give all that power to Palpatine, but that could still have just been a mistake. Well, there is one more use of the Force I have yet to mention. The classic mind trick.
You don't need to see his identification.
We don't need to see his identification.
These aren't the droids you're looking for.
These aren't the droids we're looking for.
Jedi mind tricks are a force to be reckoned with. To be able to influence the decisions of others, to implant ideas into people's heads, and in some cases, actually control other people's minds? That's awesome! Something of note is that whenever a mind trick is used, there is almost always an obvious hand gesture.
Credits will do fine.
As well as literally putting words into other people's mouths. Now let's think about everything that happens with Jar Jar once again. Initially, he was just some random village idiot. And then, after just a short while, he becomes the planetary representative for Naboo, for the Galactic Senate. But not before becoming a general in the Gungan army, and everything in between. Well, in basically all of those positions, a clumsy idiot like Jar Jar would never be trusted to hold such a status. It makes no sense why he's gotten these promotions, until you look at what's going on while he's receiving said promotions. Hand gesture towards the promoter, hand gesture towards the promoter, and then he acts all surprised. Even while giving his speech to abandon the democracy the galaxy has loved for who knows how long, he is directing his arms up at everyone present, and they all decide,
yeah, you know, until I heard this speech, I was all for democracy, but now I see his reasoning.
Before this scene, the Galactic Senate was split. Some wanted war, but some didn't. So how could a speech from this loon, who can barely form a coherent sentence, be able to influence all of them, not only to go to war, but also to abandon democracy? And not only that, but even give Jar Jar a standing ovation. Perhaps an ultimately powerful mind trick was utilized. Well, I get the rest of what you've said with the luck and the force jumping, but saying these hand gestures or him using the mind trick is a huge stretch. People make hand gestures all the time while talking. And very true that is, dear viewer. So, if you were trying to hide your use of the mind trick, you would make it less of an obvious gesture and make it more feel like casual conversation.
We got a grand army.
I've decided to go back to Naboo.
And really, that could be stretched into saying that casually doing the mind trick in this way is a form of drunken fist wushu inspired force use. Rather than making it obvious that you're using a mind trick, you hide it in casualness and clumsiness, all of your attacks and all of your mind tricks, making those all around you unsuspecting. And now, get this. If this Jar Jar theory truly was George Lucas's intent, then it would fit right in with another of Isaac Asimov's book. If you are unaware, the Star Wars universe as a whole is more influenced by Isaac Asimov's works than any other author. He basically created the Star Wars universe before the Star Wars universe was a thing. In Isaac Asimov's book, The Mule, the entire galaxy is in control by a democratic government called the Foundation. But there also exists a telepathic mind controller who acted like a clumsy, bumbling idiot all of the time. In the end, he turned out to be the big bad who had been manipulating his way up the chain of command and manipulating politicians into abandoning their current form of democracy and creating an empire that would span a third of the galaxy, start a civil war, and begin a greater conquest. Now then, does that sound familiar? And I'm not even done with Jar Jar's use of the mind trick at all, because it is all throughout The Phantom Menace, all as little bits of plotting and manipulating all those he could into the benefit of the rise of the Empire. Let's look at a few scenes where he's putting words into people's mouths. And remember my previous point that Jar Jar is animated, so all of these subtle little lip movements are all on purpose.
The Queen wishes it. She's curious about the planet. The Queen wishes it. She's curious about the planet.
The Queen will not approve.
The Queen doesn't need to know.
Well, I don't know.
Well, again, it's just coincidence, you may say. Since he's an oaf, he probably does little lip movements all the time. And that is a fair point, which is why now I'm going to show you many other scenes of him not doing that.
Now, if you'll excuse me, I will retire.
Some indigenous tribes and scavengers. A few
Plus, as a director, why would you decide to put Jar Jar in these scenes at all if he's meaningless, not doing anything? Just a background decoration. Like here, why couldn't they have put Jar Jar somewhere else off to the side? Or here, just a few inches behind the wall. They put Jar Jar here so that you could still see his lips, manipulating those around him. And as a side note, I'd like to mention that the only people that seem to notice that Jar Jar is odd and suspicious are droids.
You know, I find that Jar Jar creature to be a little odd.
Why does no one else mention that Jar Jar is an odd duck? Kinda suspicious even. Well, I'll just say this. Because the mind trick doesn't work on droids. And plus, if he's able to manipulate an entire auditorium full of politicians like this, then surely he can be constantly using a subliminal kind of mind trick that just makes everyone around him not think of him as strange and suspicious. Jar Jar had a lot to do with the events of Episode 1. And now, let's go through all of the scenes with Jar Jar in them and see how they align with this theory. For instance, in this scene, Jar Jar is told to stay here in this room of the ship, and he starts meddling around, being suspicious, and being that mind tricks don't work on droids, R2-D2 smacks him for being suspicious, but eventually has to go do his job of repairing the shield generator, leaving Jar Jar Binks alone to do whatever. Then later, after the shield generator is back up and they are ready to jump into hyperspace, they learn that the hyperdrive is leaking. Wouldn't they know that ahead of time? I mean, the ship made a huge fuss about the shield generator being down, but no big pop-up about, oh, and by the way, the hyperdrive is also broken. What are we gonna do? Instead, the ship's just like, oh, the hyperdrive in our galaxy crossing ship got shut. No big deal. They'll find out eventually. No, I suspect that if the hyperdrive of the ship was indeed shot, it would be flashing that all over the place. Meaning, it wasn't shot, perhaps. It was sabotaged from the inside. Jar Jar Binks. But why would he do that? Because Tatooine was nearby. A sparsely populated desert planet? Sounds like the perfect spot to do some scheming with as few witnesses as possible. The next scene is where the Queen sends Padme to go clean R2-D2. But note, nobody but a select few knows that Padme is the actual Queen in disguise. Due to many assassination attempts, fake queens are used as decoys. Anyway, not even Qui-Gon or Obi-Wan know this. Yet, Jar Jar seems to somehow know and begins casual conversation with her, perhaps convincing her that she wants to go outside and explore Tatooine with Qui-Gon. And under orders from the Queen, she goes. Under normal circumstances, this is not something that Padme, the real Queen, should be allowed to be doing. Not only is this a dangerous desert planet, but she'd also be hanging out with a Gungan. And while not necessarily enemies, the Gungans and the Naboo royal family have never seen eye to eye too much. They don't trust each other. So why would they suddenly trust this Gungan to be hanging out with the real Queen? And speaking of Gungans, why is Jar Jar even going with them? Gungans are aquatic. This is a hot, dry desert planet. Jar Jar even mentions this.
This son doing murder to Misa Sin.
Also, why is Qui-Gon so opposed to taking this handmaiden with him, but is perfectly fine with taking this bumbling idiot that will dry up in this heat? Also, this is that scene again, where Jar Jar is using mind tricks to put words into this guy's mouth, in order to convince Qui-Gon to take Padme. Sometime after this, a governor of Naboo sends a message to the Queen's stand-in, and Obi-Wan senses that it's a trick, and tells Qui-Gon about it, who agrees and tells everyone to send no communication. None at all, because if they do, their location could be tracked by the Sith. Shortly following this scene, we cut to Darth Maul and Palpatine having a conversation. They know that the Queen is on Tatooine. But how? This was never explained beyond, we have a trace. But from where? No messages were ever sent. So it's possible that they know because Jar Jar told them earlier, or sent a message. Later, Darth Maul shows up and a fight scene commences. So going along with this theory, you could say that the reason Jar Jar wanted Padme, the real queen, to go with them...
The Queen wishes it. She's curious about the planet.
And the reason he went into an environment that's especially hostile to his body...
This son doing murder to Misa Sin.
...was all to follow a plan. The plan was that Darth Maul would kill the Jedi, leaving Padme, the real queen, with Jar Jar and his evil intentions. Those intentions being so that they can get her out of the picture and have an easier time taking over the galaxy. But the problem is that Darth Maul sucks and ruins everything. This plan is also why Jar Jar made Padme say this bit.
Well, I don't know.
Padme and Anakin were getting along fine.
Are you an angel?
And from Jar Jar's perspective, bringing this boy with them, this other person, this other potential witness, would only complicate things. So Jar Jar tried to convince Qui-Gon to not bring him through Padme, since using a mind trick on a Jedi doesn't work. Anyway, that was the plan that wound up failing. But that plan would also mean that Jar Jar and Palpatine would have had to have already communicated with one another, and I haven't quite established that yet. But that brings me right into the next part of this video. Think about the vastness of the Star Wars galaxy, especially compared to our own. According to the Drake equation, which is way too complicated to get super into for this video, there should be about 2 more planets in the Milky Way galaxy that house intelligent life. Compared to the hundreds upon hundreds of life-supporting planets in Star Wars, the difference in scale is huge. Their galaxy's population could very well be billions of times larger than ours. So when dealing with a scale like that, you could say that living in the same planet compared to the overall size, to them, is the same as us living in the same neighborhood compared to our overall size. And Jar Jar and Palpatine are both from Naboo. So it's possible that they've met sometime before Episode 1, their power in the dark side of the Force drawing them together. Plus, at the end of The Phantom Menace at the funeral for Qui-Gon, Jar Jar and Palpatine are standing right beside each other. Before they've even met. Of course, that's before they've met with quotes around it. And this was shown right before we have this dialogue.
There's no doubt the mysterious warrior was a Sith.
Always two there are. No more, no less. A master and an apprentice.
But which was destroyed? The master or the apprentice?
Now, obviously, this is primarily foreshadowing that Palpatine is secretly the Emperor. But just off-screen there is Jar Jar. An even deeper secret, perhaps? And perhaps Jar Jar is the real Phantom Menace. I mean, after all, Darth Maul would definitely stick out in the crowd. I mean, seriously, what's so phantom-y about him? Well, phantom has a few different definitions. Something apparently seen, heard, or sensed, but having no apparent physical reality. An appearance or illusion without material substance, as a mirage or optical illusion, a mysterious entity, a ghost. Darth Maul does not really fit any of those things, even though his face is the face on the cover of the movie. But Jar Jar does fit some of those descriptions. Jar Jar is putting up a false appearance as a bumbling idiot as an illusion, and he's doing so using the Force, which has no material substance. Perhaps Jar Jar is what was sensed at the beginning of the film in the ship above Naboo.
I have a bad feeling about this.
I don't sense anything.
It's not about the mission, Master. It's something elsewhere. Elusive.
Perhaps he was sensing that they were about to meet the real Phantom Menace. As for other minor bits of supporting evidence, consider these. As Jar Jar returns home with Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, everyone inside is panicking. They are all panicking. This isn't quite the tone you'd expect of, oh, there's the village idiot again. I thought he was banished. Pfft, what a moron. Rather, this is the tone of, he's back. Oh, he's back. Oh, he's back. I'm getting out of here. Here's another one. Have you ever considered that Darth Maul, the Emperor, Darkside Anakin, and General Grievous all have yellow eyes? Perhaps it's a sign of being strong on the dark side. Jar Jar also has yellow eyes. Okay, so that was the weakest bit of evidence in this video so far, but now consider this. After Episode 1, we frequently see Jar Jar with Palpatine. Right beside him, right behind him, constantly being there. And even here, we see Jar Jar walk over to this elevator like he's expecting someone to arrive, then acts all like, "Whoa, I didn't realize someone was coming up the elevator," and then does his usual overly happy act. He could sense the strong force of the Jedi coming up the elevator. And then when he saw who it was at the elevator, he put on his act. And that's about all of the direct evidence I'm going to bring up right now at this moment. Next, let's cover a glaring issue we seem to have left open. If Jar Jar was so important, then why did he become less and less relevant as the films went on? And with that, we must look at things outside of the films, some behind-the-scenes action. While creating the prequel trilogy, George Lucas, among other creators, though mainly him, have some pretty interesting quotes we should think about. First of all, George Lucas said that he wanted the prequel trilogies to rhyme with the original, meaning that they both feel like each other and have some thematic and character equivalence. Then who in the original trilogy would be the Jar Jar equivalent? Yoda, perhaps? Yeah, maybe. Think about that, as well as this quote from George Lucas. Yoda really comes from a tradition in mythological storytelling, fairy tales, of the hero finding a little creature on the side of the road that seems very insignificant and not very important, but who turns out to be the Master Wizard, or the Master Thing. Yeah! Before Yoda was revealed to be the highest Jedi Master, he was an odd goofball that was frankly very annoying.
I'm looking for someone.
Looking? Found someone you have, I would say.
Hey! It's my dinner! Hey, get out of there! R2!
In the prequels, Jar Jar is a goofball that Qui-Gon literally runs into on the side of the road. And not just any goofball, but a goofball who's intent on doing all of these malicious things. So perhaps the plan was originally that Jar Jar would later be revealed as the Master Wizard, or the Master Sith.
Jar Jar is a key to all this. If we get Jar Jar working.
So if Jar Jar was the key to all of the bad things happening in the Star Wars universe, then why didn't they keep it that way? Why didn't they go through with it? Why was there no big reveal like the classic,
"No, I am your father"?
I mean, think about it. If Jar Jar was later revealed to have been the Master Sith all along, a reveal of that scale would be on par, if not even exceed, the big reveal of Vader being Luke's father, making the whole prequel trilogy rhyme way better than it does now. So why didn't they do it? Well, let's think back to 1999.
We're talking Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. It opens tonight at midnight.
It was our idea to wait here for 3 weeks to see this film.
Star Wars Episode 1 was just released, and all of the critical acclaim was missing. Which is not at all what they expected to happen. And the number one thing that all the blame was put on? The existence of Jar Jar. Though, that's not the only thing by far. There's also the issue of problematic child acting, and writing issues, and plot moving along at a weird pace. There's tons of issues that people have with the prequel trilogies, but the one that always gets the most blame is the existence of Jar Jar. So, imagine you're George Lucas, and you have this grand plan for Jar Jar, but then everyone hates him. He's not comedy at all. They don't even like that he's an idiot. They don't like his existence, period. Then why would you keep the idea that this character should be the grandest character, has the most effect on the Star Wars franchise as a whole? You probably wouldn't really want that. Unless you really thought about it, then maybe. But still, from first glance, it's easy to see why this change was made. It was definitely the safer route to go, rather than sticking with his initial plan of Jar Jar being the most important character in all of Star Wars. Jar Jar hate became so popular that it was easily one of the first memes. Even older than I Can Has Cheeseburger. So it's easy to understand why George Lucas would change things. In fact, we know for a fact that the Jar Jar hate changed episodes 2 and 3 drastically. How do we know this? We know this because the voice actor for Jar Jar, Ahmed Best, told us in an AMA that George did indeed make massive changes to the trilogy's story arc due to the backlash received towards Jar Jar. So Jar Jar was given less and less importance as the films moved on. But you can't just up and remove such an important character without a replacement, so they added in Count Dooku. Another major complaint about the prequels by fans is that Count Dooku kind of appeared out of nowhere. He had no backstory. Heck, even in the Star Wars books, he was nowhere to be found. He literally just appeared here, was thrown in. Perhaps because he was a replacement for Jar Jar. How awesome would it be if in the latter parts of Episode 2, Jar Jar revealed himself as the ultimate Sith Master, and then he and Yoda both had an epic duel. The masters of each side. But in the end, they both escape. Then, at some point during Episode 3, either Jar Jar is defeated or makes a grand escape. In fact, you could speculate that Episode 2 would keep Jar Jar a secret all the way through, and even partially through Episode 3, until he would be revealed, and then you'd have your epic Yoda versus Jar Jar fight then. If Episode 1 didn't receive such harsh lashback, Episodes 2 and 3 were most likely going to be very different. Hence these massive changes to the story arc that Best speaks of. But wouldn't he know about this plot twist? Why wouldn't he tell us? Well, easy. Back when filming the original trilogy, George Lucas kept the big reveal of Vader's fatherhood a secret to everybody all the way up until they filmed that scene. And even then, he asked most of his crew to leave as they filmed a secret scene that would go differently from what the script had originally said. That is how dedicated George Lucas was to keeping Darth Vader's fatherhood a secret. And he could have been the same way with this Jar Jar plot twist, because that would possibly have surpassed the Vader fatherhood plot twist in movies. This could be the new face of the greatest plot twist in movie history. And I don't know how I feel about that. The hated, bumbling idiot is actually the true Sith Master, and the clumsy idiocity was all an act to make all of those around him, and the audience, none the wiser. But little bits here and there were thrown in that could later be looked back upon and seen as foreshadowing. There is literally no other reason for this droid scene with Jar Jar apparently doing an amazing force jump, causing droid confusion, to exist. Best, Jar Jar's voice actor, has also tweeted out things like this. This is a prototype for the Episode 2 script, and it's entitled Jar Jar's Adventure. Now, titles for things change all the time, especially pre-production. But with a title like that, it's obvious to know that the prototype script for Episode 2 had Jar Jar in a much more prominent role than what we see in the final release. Best has also mentioned that there is still an unseen deleted scene for Episode 2 where Palpatine is caught talking with Jar Jar, thanking him for his promotion and abandoning democracy. And most importantly, after seeing the Reddit post that started all of this theorization, he tweeted out this. I will say this. It feels really good when the hidden meaning behind the work is seen, no matter how long it takes. Hashtag the Phantom Menace. I guess this means Robot Chicken was right all those years ago.
What am I doing? This is the end. I've got to make amends for my life.
Moi moi!
Jar Jar, it's Palpatine. Look, I need to apologize for manipulating you into granting me emergency powers. It was wrong, and I'm sorry.
Oh, say yes! Right, Palpy. You some manipulated me. Okay, Papi.
So what does this mean for the future of Star Wars? Well, potentially nothing at all. In fact, it's likely to be nothing at all, because after all, this is just a theory. And even if it is true, George Lucas did make Jar Jar Binks different in the prequel trilogies than he originally intended. So it changes nothing. This theory is non-canon. Or could it still be canon? Just because Jar Jar wasn't on screen much anymore doesn't mean he wasn't manipulating things off screen. And remember, Jar Jar never actually died in the movies. We never see it. Could an older Jar Jar be the true master of the Sith, even over Darth Sidious, the Emperor? Here's this quote from Yoda.
Always two there are. No more, no less.
You can find that this is a common occurrence in the Star Wars franchise. First, it's Darth Maul. Nope, he's actually the apprentice to Palpatine. Ooh, Darth Vader is the big bad. Nope, it's actually Darth Sidious. Oh, you thought Darth Sidious was bad. Nope, the real source of power for the dark side is none other than Jar Jar Binks.
There's always a bigger fish.
I mean, heck, even Padme and the Decoy Queen had this going on. So if there's always two, never more, never less, then who was Palpatine's apprentice after Darth Maul died? Anakin, I guess, but what about the 10 to 15 years between that? Well, who was hanging out with Palpatine? Also, is this First Order a new faction altogether, or is it a re-uprising of the Empire controlled by the Sith? How would the Empire have stayed around then? If you look at the history of almost every dictatorship, as soon as the leader falls, it all falls. Well, it may have stuck around because the leader didn't fall. Darth Vader may have fallen. The Emperor may have fallen. But Jar Jar Binks remains. But wait, some hardcore Star Wars fans say. Jar Jar can't be still alive because Gungans can only live 65 years. That is their lifespan. And that is very true, excellent point, and I've done some calculations, and Jar Jar still being alive in Episode 7 would mean he'd be around 86 years of age, which is significantly more than 65. But does such a higher number matter that much? I mean, after all, the technology used to keep Darth Vader alive? That could easily extend the lifespan of a Gungan. Plus, there's General Grievous, who is more machine than man. Or whatever he is. Obviously, that's keeping him alive way past his lifespan. Plus, Yoda lived to be around 900 years old, and this could just be part of his species, but no detail has ever been given about his species. So it could be speculated that those who are especially strong in the Force could have longer lifespans. So machine-based life support on top of Force-based life support? Very doable. Plus, that's 65 years of the Gungan lifespan. That's 65 galactic years, and we don't really have a means of translating that into Earth years. And now, if all of the speculation about the next Star Wars trilogy were true, that would mean that Snoke, the name of the new big bad guy, would be a very aged Jar Jar. And that is actually way, way too fitting. While the face of Snoke has yet to be revealed, here is what we do know. We know that prequel content will exist in the new trilogy, as we see people working on Gungan heads in some Episode 7 behind-the-scenes photographs. And we know that this is some concept art of Snoke, showing his face. He's reptilian or amphibian in design, but this is just concept art, mainly of his outfit, not final. And wouldn't J.J. Abrams, the director of the new trilogy, want to keep this secret very well hidden, just like George Lucas did with Vader? We also know that Snoke is very tall, and that he is animated. He's being played by Andy Serkis, the same guy who did Gollum from The Lord of the Rings and Caesar in Rise of the Planet of the Apes. Oh, so tall and animated, you say? Well, now here's one more little fun fact. Remember how Vader is Dutch for father, and how that basically gives away the big plot twist? Well, Snoke is actually also Dutch. It's Dutch for pike, as in the type of fish. Now, who's tall, animated, and fish-like?
There's always a bigger fish.
People have written 20-page blog posts that your character is the evil Jar Jar Binks. Care to comment?
Well, it's true.
It would explain certain things, yes, certainly.
I'm usually more concerned about looking at some of the things online to see if, in fact, they're getting it right. And every now and then they do.
Oh boy. Oh boy. Huge video. And thank you so much for watching it all the way through. It really does mean a lot to me. This is the biggest video I've made in quite some time. All of this is fun and games. So tell me, what do you think about this theory?
Ferrari Patootie, it's a mess!
Honestly, from my perspective, I think the first chunk about it is true. Jar Jar being the main villain was the original intent for George Lucas making the prequels. That was the plan from the beginning. I'm a little skeptical still about Jar Jar being the new Snoke. Maybe it's Jar Jar's apprentice or something, and that's another Gungan, and he's like, Snoke was my dad! Or something. It's all possible. Again, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoy overthinking things like this, here's a selection of some of my favorite other videos where I do this, where I overthink stuff. Mostly with video games. As in almost exclusively with video games. But, I mean, that's just me. I really, really hope you enjoyed this. Yeah, thanks again for watching. And make sure you promise me, no matter what happens, you will always use that noggin and stay away from the dark side of the Force. Because I couldn't think of a cheesier outro.